Welcome to another edition of the Side Stories of the Untold Protestant Reformation. I am using the acronym TUPPER to let any new viewers know that these side stories are related to my series entitled The Untold Story of the Protestant Reformation. This is episode 4 of the mini-series under the Tupper label. We'll be discussing the Munsters. But before I get into this episode, I want to call to your attention a recent video of mine entitled The 666, the Number of the Beast. That video got a little bit of attention over the weekend because of the comments section and the debating between Catholics and Protestants that was going on. Admittingly, a good portion of that debating is myself debating with Protestants. But I was trying to leave some of those comments open in hopes that members of the audience would engage. I encourage strongly, if you're up for it, to debate. It solidifies your faith. It gives you a stronger foundation for which to stand on if you know what you're talking about. And not to say that there wasn't Catholics engaging. There was. I thought it was pretty cool. There was good, constructive debate on both sides. I thought it was really cool. I think it was Joseph who mentioned Our Lady of Guadalupe and changing the New World over in 1531. Not to say that that came from me. That's an extremely widely known miracle, that I'm not saying that I'm the one that did that. I'm just saying that was a really cool comment that I thought was pretty awesome. But yes, I think that it's very healthy for you to engage in debating about your beliefs because it makes you stronger. It's the house on a rock or the house on sand argument. Ironically, one of the people I was talking to wanted to bring up the fact of the church burning people at the stake, and that's true. I can't deny that. But what they didn't know is that Martin Luther and his magistrate and Zwingli did it too, and I'm going to talk about that in this episode. The Anabaptists. The Anabaptists were just as much as a part of the Reformation as Luther and Zwingli, and sometimes more. I was even contemplating whether to put this story of the Anabaptists under my label, Side Stories, because in many cases, after the Peasants' War, it's the Anabaptists who are the main story until Calvin comes along. Just like my series entitled The Untold Story of the Protestant Reformation, the story of the Anabaptists has been covered up for 450 years. Not until the 1960s have historians been able to tell their story in conjunction with the Protestant Reformation. Why? Well, it doesn't go along with the narrative that we've been fed in our high school history books. Anabaptists take the doctrine of sola scriptura to its most radical forms. See, in 1523, when Zurich was changed over to Zwinglian's form of Protestantism, and they seized all the Catholic Church property, Zwingli actually had followers that broke away from him and said that he was anti-biblical, claiming that nowhere in the Bible does it say that the magistrates or the rulers should be in charge of religion or moral issues. In fact, many of the Anabaptists believed that any governing authority was anti-biblical, so they stopped paying taxes. They also wouldn't serve in any army, nor would they serve any role in government. It is also not coincidence that the Anabaptist movement started in the same region as the Peasants' War, if you watched that video of mine. Thomas Munster, who I spoke about, he was classified as an Anabaptist. Oddly, after the Peasants' War and all the death and destruction, it was the Anabaptist movement that grew and spread. A lot had to do with Luther and Zwingli being looked at as part of the ruling class, part of the problem, part of the evil oppressors. They were seen as persecutors of Christians. And how could you not see that? Martin Luther wrote his pamphlet on putting the peasants down like mad dogs. And Zwingli got his magistrates to outlaw Anabaptism in 1526. A law punishable by execution, burn the men at the stake and drown the women. Let me give you a couple basic details and beliefs of the Anabaptists. They ranged. They also diverted into different groups, too. They couldn't agree on anything either. But basically, the name comes from the rejection of infant baptism, which was believed by the Catholic Church, Martin Luther and Lutherans, and Zwingli and the Zwinglian reformers. Strong believers in sola scriptura, however, they reject sola fide, and this idea of justification by faith alone or justified is a gift by God when you're born. As far as Eucharist, they do believe in celebrating a meal. Do this in remembrance of me, as Jesus says in Luke's gospel. But they do not believe in transubstantiation, that the body and blood do transform into the sacrifice of Jesus. For the most part, most of the groups, and there are several of those that break off, the Hutterites, the Swiss Brethren, and the Munsters, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, they're anti-government, which means they're going to be extremely oppressed and persecuted by the ruling class, Protestant and Catholic alike. In 1534, in the city of Munster, a preacher by the name of Jan Mackijs got the local magistrate and government to overthrow the bishop there and Catholicism. And it's an unusual event because the preacher, Mackijs, he's an Anabaptist. So what they have here in Munster is this hybrid form of Protestantism, a civic Anabaptist. If you watched my video on Zwingli, I spoke about civic reformers like Zwingli and Calvin who believed in Protestantism should be run by the magistrates or the ruling class. This overthrow causes a lot of death and turmoil because the new regime believes that if you're not going to be rebaptized as an adult and become an Anabaptist, then you need to be killed. This causes a mass exodus of people leaving the city. But most of those people are men. And the reason is because there was a law saying that you cannot take the property away from a woman. So the city becomes predominantly female while the men flee. At the same time, there is an influx of Anabaptists because Mackijs, the preacher, has told him that the apocalypse is going to start in the city of Munster on Easter of 1534. On that day, the Anabaptists will need to extinguish all the ungodly and prepare the city for Jesus' arrival. They start instituting laws that will prepare for the second coming, and one of them is no private ownership of property or belongings. I spoke about the emergence of communism during the Protestant Reformation in a couple episodes, and this is another example. Incidentally, one of the people I was debating with over the weekend on that other video wanted to claim that it was the Catholic Church who started communism. That's not true. Again, it comes from Acts of the Apostles. When the early church was starting out, all of the disciples shared their belongings with the church. Those who believe in sola scriptura wanted to follow those actions, and this is where they get this law. Another law they instituted was polygamy. Not only the sharing of property and belongings, but the sharing of wives. And again, this is taken from the Old Testament, where the old patriarchs had multiple wives. King Solomon was said to have 700 wives. Of course, Jesus didn't have any. In the meantime, the bishop who was overthrown has returned to the city and surrounded it with his army. And I can imagine that some of the people in that army are the husbands and fathers who were thrown out. And I'm probably not the only one who sees the similarities between this scenario in 1534 and Waco, Texas in the 1990s. It looks like the exact same thing. David Koresh and his commune and his belief in polygamy surrounded by the FBI. These two stories look exactly alike. Anyway, on Easter Sunday of 1534, that preacher opens the gates of Munster and rides out with his troops only to be slaughtered. However, they're not conquered. The city is not conquered, and they could not breach the walls of Munster. The preacher of Machias, his second in command, takes over the city. He is called King Jan, as people are to refer to him, and he is a prophet with a direct link that God talks to. He has a throne put up in the middle of town square, which people are to bow before. Under his regime, things get even more crazy, including cannibalism, because they were cut off from their food. But who should come to the aid of the Catholic bishop trying to siege the city? Philip of Hesse, one of the leaders of the Lutheran Smalkalvik League. With Catholics and Protestants alike sieging the city, they outnumbered the Anabaptists, breached the walls, and killed everybody inside. To set an example for all other Anabaptists throughout Europe, even thinking about being anti-government, Philip of Hesse and the bishop took the dead bodies of the leaders of the Kingdom of Munster, put them in cages, and hoisted them up over St. Lambert's Church. Those hanging cages are still visible today.